Food grains dumping. How can India dump food grains in US? Thundered Donald Trump. Dumping refers to countries selling their surplus produce or products for ridiculously low prices. Just around 6 decades ago, India depended heavily on America's Public Law 480 Food for Peace program, under which the US shipped millions of tons of wheat to India. At its peak, India received over 10 million tons annually, which was often low grade, reddish American wheat and baked into hard, dark chapatis. The food aid the US sent to India was not just low grade but also contaminated with Parthenium weed seeds. Post independence, India was grappling with poverty and acute hunger. The ripple effects of nearly 2 centuries of colonial policies were still very fresh in the 1960s when there was widespread hunger in the country. The British regime had left Indian agriculture stagnant, the yields were low, the soils had depleted, and millions of farmers were either landless or in debt. This was the time when Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru urged citizens to replace wheat with sweet potatoes. Amid the shortage struck the catastrophe of the 1965 monsoon failure, which resulted in India's food grain production during the 1965-66 crop falling to 72.3 million tons. The monsoon failure led to a countrywide shortage in food production, causing famine in Bihar in 1966 that killed over 2,500 people. A further crisis was only averted after the Indira Gandhi government was able to secure large aid shipments of wheat from the US under the US Public Law 480 PL 480 or the Food for Peace program, which it then distributed across the country through a system of fair price shops. The food insufficiency was such that it is called the ship to mouth survival era of India. At its peak, India would receive more than 10 million tons of American wheat. But while the US food aid helped India avert another famine, Indian leaders quickly found out that American aid came with its own caveats. The US used its massive food surplus to influence and control nations. This was seen during the administration of Lyndon B. Johnson when the US used India's criticism of its actions in Vietnam as an excuse to delay aid shipments. A daily wait for grain ships during this era became a national trauma. As noted by a US state government history document, this deadlock was only resolved after Prime Minister Indira Gandhi went to Washington DC and gave personal assurances to Johnson to implement agricultural reforms and temper criticism of US policy regarding Vietnam. Under geneticist Mr. M.S. Swaminathan, who later came to be known as the godfather of the Green Revolution, the late 1960s saw India adopting new farming techniques and technologies, including high yielding wheat varieties, which were introduced by Indian researchers experimenting with Mexican wheat varieties. India expanded the use of artificial irrigation and chemical fertilizers, increased use of mechanized equipment like tractors and threshers, and new government funded procurement and marketing institutions like the minimum support price MSP. These changes raised wheat yields and aggregate grain output, shrinking import requirements and eventually building buffer stocks. By 1974, India had achieved complete self sufficiency in wheat production. But while wheat self sufficiency was the immediate goal, the Green Revolution had larger effects. Improvements in irrigation, input supply chains, procurement, subsidies, and rice cultivation in many regions, especially West Bengal, benefited heavily. The following decades saw India steadily increase rice production and develop a competitive global advantage in both staple, that is non basmati, and premium, that is basmati rice varieties. It must be noted that through this shift, the consumption pattern has also evolved in America. Rice was once a marginal item in the diet of Americans, but its consumption had doubled since the 1970s. And India, which once received aid from the US, is now one of the biggest suppliers of Indian basmati and non basmati rice to America. This was seemingly caused by demographic shifts as Asian and Hispanic populations, which consume more rice traditionally, now comprise larger shares of the US total population. Gluten free trends and new rice products have also boosted demand. By the early 2020s, India had become the world's largest rice exporter by volume, shipping a record 22.2 million metric tons in 2022. Thank you very much. Now some word power. This was seemingly caused by demographic shifts as Asian and Hispanic populations, Hispanic, HISPANAC, Hispanic means relating to Spain or to Spanish speaking countries. Now, please find meaning of the following word. Post independence, India was grappling with poverty and acute hunger. Grapple, GRAPPLE, grapple means